I want to welcome everybody with Dealing with Burnout. This is our webinar Wednesday for today, July the 12th. We will run from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock this morning. Okay. My name is Nicole Worthy. I'm a training assistant here at the Kentucky Transportation Center Technology Transfer Program. I am the training assistant / registrar at the center, and I've been here for over 30 years. So I really enjoy what I do, and I really enjoy the webinars. And I want to thank you all for coming today. Again, today is Dealing with Burnout. This course is part of our Webinar Wednesday series. It is worth 1 credit hour. So after the course today, I will get your certificates emailed out to you all. Again, my name is Nicole Worthy, and I am the Training Assistant Registrar at the Technology Transfer Program. I will be facilitating this webinar today. If you have any questions or have technical issues, please send me a message in the chat box or take yourself off mute, and I can help you with that. Please sign in using the chat box. If you are sharing a device with someone, please make sure to type everyone's name in the chat box. If you do not type your name in the chat box, you will not receive credit for today's training. Today's webinar will run from 9 o'clock to 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. This morning, our speaker is going to be Carolyn Miller. Carolyn is Assistant County Manager in Chatham County, North Carolina, and is the principal. Oh, I lost my place. Excuse me. Carolyn Miller is Assistant County Manager in Chatham County, North Carolina, and is the principal instructor in their comprehensive in-house training curriculum on leadership, management, and supervision. She is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin with a degree in history from Pennsylvania State University with a master's in human resources and employment relations, and East Carolina University with a postgraduate certificate in community college instruction. She works with the LTAP program at North Carolina State University at the University of Kentucky and is instructing courses in supervision, leadership, and diversity, equity, and inclusion for their continuing education programs for local government employees. I want to welcome Carolyn today and thank her for instructing the class today for us. I've had other classes with Carolyn. She's a really excellent instructor, speaker. So I think you all have a great training session today. Again, if you have not, please type your name in the chat box for me. If you share a device with someone or computer, please list all names so that everyone gets credit for attending again. Again, if you have any questions, just put that in the chat, or you can take yourself off mute. We will have poll questions, a couple poll questions today for you, and Carolyn will tell me when those are. So thank you all again for coming, and enjoy the webinar today. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn.
All right. Thank you, Nicole. Welcome, everyone. As Nicole mentioned, I am currently an assistant county manager in Chatham County in North Carolina. For those of you that are not familiar with that, I wouldn't be surprised. It's right in the middle. We're about 30 miles west of Raleigh, the capital of North Carolina. So I do a lot of instruction with North Carolina State University in their LTAP program, and do lots of classes in leadership and supervision, but the majority of my background has been in human resources, and I was the human resources director here for 23 years before moving into the role I'm in now. And so this is a topic that I was telling Nicole before we started is kind of near and dear to me, because I think over the course of a career, I've seen it in myself, I've seen it in other people, and I think it's important that we talk about it. And so what we're going to cover today is kind of looking at what burnout is. We use it very casually, I think, in today's society, about a lot of other things, or everything really. And then we place blame somewhere. So we're going to talk about what burnout actually is, some of the signs of burnout and some of the root causes. Then we're going to talk about you a little bit, how to manage personal burnout. And then because many of you are managers and organizational leaders, talk about workplace burnout prevention and reduction. As I often give this disclaimer when I teach classes, I make nothing up. I have been in human resources too long to have an imagination anymore. And so any example I give, especially about this topic, is probably something I have dealt with directly, or it may be personally me. I'll give that as a disclaimer. So we're going to start with our first poll question. So I'll let Nicole pop that up there.
All right.
I'm curious to know whether you have ever or you are currently experiencing burnout at work.
Answers are coming in pretty quick. Looks like we get all the
All right.
answers. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results.
All right. That's an easy one.
There you go.
All right. An overwhelming majority of you have experienced this, and I'm not at all surprised by that. I saw this graphic recently on Facebook and I loved it, so I wanted to include it in this presentation. Exhauster-whelmulated, and that is that feeling of being exhausted, overwhelmed, and overstimulated all at one time. And I think we can all identify situations in which we feel like this. Burnout has evolved, believe it or not, but has been classified by the World Health Organization as a syndrome. And it is a state of vital exhaustion, is how it is described by the World Health Organization. And in May, as recently as in May of 2020, 41% of employees that were surveyed found themselves burned out, largely due to COVID. And just a few months prior to that, prior to COVID, that percentage was at 23%. So you can see how such a significant event like COVID has such an impact on us as people. But burnout really isn't just a pandemic problem. Even going back further prior to the pandemic, a vast majority of professionals indicated that at some point in their career they had experienced burnout, and that almost over 90% of them said that having an unmanageable amount of stress negatively impacts the quality of their work. And if you're thinking, no kidding, Carolyn, right? I tuned in for an hour for you to tell me this, and I already knew this. I think it's important to think through that process, and that's what I encourage you to do after you listen to this morning. Is to get back past those obvious statistics and say, yeah, that makes sense. That an unmanageable amount of stress negatively impacts the quality of work. I encourage you to think about how. What are the long-term effects of that? It is an occupational phenomenon, but I think it can also apply to other areas of our lives. And so while I'm going to talk primarily about workplace burnout today, I think if you or others that you work with and know are involved in tasks such as personal caregiving of someone, or a home situation that is particularly chaotic for a long period of time, it can also lead to personal burnout. So as I mentioned, the World Health Organization has classified this as a syndrome, and it is chronic workplace stress that has not successfully been managed. And I think that part of our struggle as people is that we like to be in control. We like to be in control of our destinies in a big, broad sense. We like to be in control of our day. We like to be in control. We have this idea of how things should work. And when they don't, it's stressful. And particularly in those people who classify themselves as burned out, there's an overwhelming prevalence of lack of control of the situation, of the stress points, of the workload. And as control is lost, we can spiral into this situation. So chronic workplace stress that has not successfully been managed. And I will stop here and say one thing before I continue. If you have a question, I very much encourage that. So if you have a question, you want to take yourself off mute, or you want to throw it in the chat, I will try to get to that. And Nicole's good about giving me a heads up that there is something in the chat I need to pay attention to if I don't have it up. But if you have questions, please feel free to ask them or interrupt me as I'm going along here. Okay. So let's look at the difference really quickly between stress and burnout, because I think they're used interchangeably, and I think that it is lessening the impact of the word burnout. Okay? And as somebody who has made a professional career of dealing with other people's drama, which is what HR is basically, there are those people that I work with that are forever proclaiming that they are burned out. And you kind of get numb to that after a while. About what does that really mean? What does that really look like? Are they really burned out? Are they just stressed? Or I just gave them something else to do and now they're complaining about it? What is it really? So I think it's important to delineate the difference between stress and burnout. Stress is the response to a perceived threat. Okay? So it is a reactionary thing. Burnout, on the other hand, is a state of physical, emotional, mental exhaustion that is caused by prolonged or excessive stress. Okay, so sometimes they present very similarly, but just remember that burnout is the compounding of prolonged or excessive stress. So, for example, I just want to go through some of these examples to kind of show you and illustrate for you the difference between the two. So with burnout, you may be constantly exhausted. But on the other hand, with stress, you may have more energy because it's eliciting that response from you to that one acute situation. Okay. In situations in which you are burned out, you may lose interest in something you once enjoyed. But with stress, you may still enjoy some of those things, even though they may cause you stress, or you may be under stress because of them. Okay? For some people, their hobbies cause them stress. Okay. So one of the hobbies, as an example, we're going to talk about hobbies in a little bit, but one of the hobbies that I have recently picked up is horseshoes. And I picked up horseshoes because I turned 50 this year. And as a 50-year-old person in a higher profile position within a county government that sponsors and operates senior games, I got to compete in senior games this year. And so one of the events that I picked was horseshoes and cornhole, because everybody does cornhole. But I thought, here's something that I could do outside of work that that would keep me active, and be like I don't have a lot of hobbies, so I thought, oh, this would be good. And then I went to my first horseshoes tournament, and that's, if any of you pitch horseshoes, those are some intense people. You got to have the right shoes. You got to be able to score properly. You got to be able to just hang in there, and throw 200 horseshoes in a match. And I thought, I'm going to sign up for this tournament, just kind of go and have. And now, well, I was like swarmed because there weren't that many women there. So it was like, all of a sudden, now it's, are you going to be playing in this tournament? And what kind of horseshoes do you have? And oh, you really need to do this, and you really need to do this. And I'm competing against myself. And all of a sudden, something that I have very quickly learned to enjoy is a bit of a stress point for me. Okay. So in burnout, you may have a loss of motivation, which may prompt you to make decisions that you wouldn't normally make. So especially with workplace burnout, there is that overwhelming reluctance to enter into to go to work completely. Okay? And some of the folks that I've talked with that are truly burned out, it takes everything they have to come to work, period. And with stress, that the day is going to be stressful. You're under a tremendous amount of stress, but that motivation to work has not been diminished. Okay? And so there's a distinct difference here in some of our natural reactions to these things. And so when you very casually use the word, I'm so burned out, it may in fact just be, I'm under a lot of stress at this point. And knowing when to be able to differentiate between the two is important. Okay. So there's primarily three different types of burnout. There's overload burnout, and this is what most people think of when they imagine burnout, right? It is continuing to work at an unsustainable pace in the pursuit of success, financial security, recognition, that promotion that you've wanted forever, some title, something. Okay. So that's overwhelmingly what people think of when they imagine burnout. There's also something called under-challenged burnout. And so a heavy workload can create burnout, but so can a lack of challenging work. And people need to be stimulated. They need to be satisfied in their careers. And without that passion for what they do, they lose interest and disconnect. And I use the phrase that I've heard so many people say in many different iterations. I love what I do, but there are days I don't like it. And I know that if I am at the point where I don't love what I do anymore, fundamentally don't love what I do anymore, that I am probably in some stage of burnout. Right. With that, and the last type, so you've got just being under challenged. And the last is neglect burnout. And without a sense of purpose and why you're at work, people feel helpless or directionless. It's hard to stay engaged when you feel like nothing you do makes a difference. And this is something we see very often in jobs that are deal in human services, animal services. If you've ever heard the phrase compassion fatigue, this is part of that, where you do and you do and you do. And I've talked with a number of social workers, particularly, who work in family services, who do everything they can to reunite children with their families and not be subjected to the foster care system long term, only to have it repeat, only to have it happen again. So you do all of this and it doesn't seem to make a difference.
You have one comment in the chat box.
Okay.
Brian says WHO defines stress as a state of worry or mental tension caused by a difficult situation.
Okay. Well, good. Thank you for the WHO definition of that. So you can see how that differs from their definition of burnout. And I'm going to make a generational comment here because I think everybody can identify with that. I don't mean this to be an overgeneralization about any particular group, but I know I'm a firm right in the middle member of Generation X. And my parents are boomers, and they were taught us, you just got to power through it. You've just got to deal with it. And I watched my father deal with a lot of bad bosses and bad situations, and he stuck with it and stayed at the same company regardless of what was going on. And so I think oftentimes in my generation and generations older, boomers in particular, there is a reluctance, or it takes a long time to admit that you're burned out, or even admit it publicly, period. Because it has been drilled in our head, you just got to deal with it. And I think some of our younger generations, our millennials and the newest generation, you can call it any number of things, Gen Z, centennials, have been taught to first of all share what they're feeling a whole lot more, but also not just deal with it. And so we're going to see more people, I think, in our workplaces more connected to what they're feeling and how it impacts their work. Okay. And that's not to say good, bad, or otherwise, but I think it's a reality that we are all dealing with in a multi-generational workplace. That concept of just dealing with it is not as accepted by younger generations. Okay. All right. Let's look at some of so now that we've kind of looked at what burnout is, let's look at some of the signs and symptoms of burnout. And this is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination. It's only 3 of them, but it can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. Okay. Feelings of depletion or exhaustion. Are you tired when you wake up? Okay. Or the feeling of exhaustion that you get knowing you're going into a situation that exacerbates that burnout. So if it is work that is causing the burnout, you're going into work, you're already exhausted before you even start the day. Another is increased mental distance from the job or negative feelings towards one's own career. Okay. And it's beyond just I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. It is, you just check out. You're just not there. Now, I will admit to having burnout moments. How's that? I try not to, because it just happens. So I was just describing this presentation to a coworker of mine as we were going somewhere. And I said, last Monday, so we were closed on the 4th, like everybody is, but we were open on Monday. And so you can imagine how many people were at work on Monday. But I was here. And one of my coworkers asked if I had gotten her email and did I want to meet about this litany of questions she sent me. And I looked at her and I said, nope. And she kind of looked at me. I said, I can't. Brain's not there. I have fried out. I have not gotten a break, had that mental break. I said it would not be productive. I call it a burnout moment, right? I was done. And my brain was not engaged. It was on Monday afternoon on a day that hardly anybody was here except, about 4 people in a 15-person office. So I was distanced from the job that day. I will admit it. And I try to be very open about that. If I'm not in a position to engage or I am have an increased mental distance from the job or that task in particular, I just don't. Here's where managers start paying attention, and that is when there is reduced professional productivity. You see things that would normally not be sliding off the radar or, kind of sloughing off. Takes longer to return emails and phone calls. Less accessibility. And this is when managers, unfortunately, start paying attention. But sometimes that horse has already left the gate. And so we're going to talk about what you can do within your workplace in a little bit. But recognize that this can manifest itself in a lot of different ways for different people. And what you may see in one, you may not see in another. So here's some of the stages of burnout, how this kind of progresses in reference to a workplace environment. So this is in a particular job or position. Whenever you get the job or a task, a big project, something like that, there's that honeymoon stage where you're creative, you're energized, you're excited to have been picked for this position, project, what have you. And you come out of the gate strong. And then that wears off, like the honeymoon stage of anything. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay? The honeymoon stage of anything wears off. And then it becomes a balancing act. It takes more effort to keep that level of performance up. So you've started out of the gate real high, and now it's starting to dip a little bit. So it takes more effort to stay up here. And you have your good days and your bad days. and where it starts to lead into burnout, because I think we're all there all the time, right? You got good days, you got bad days. I don't know about you, but I sometimes got a list of things I want to do today, and I just love crossing them off. And that makes me feel more energized and more enlivened. And I'm like, I am getting something done. And then there's other days I go home and I have no idea what I've done that day. None. So I think a lot of us hover right at that balancing act. But where it starts to slip into a stage of burnout is when you start having chronic stress symptoms. You are stressed more days than not. And it is the little things, it is the little inconveniences that cause a more acute and significant emotional reaction. Okay, so things that would not normally irritate you, put you out, or concern you do. Okay, so you're stressed more days than not. And now when you start getting into that burnout stage, that is when you start seeing the mental, emotional, and physical signs of burnout, especially. And many people have those physical signs. They have impacts on their sleep patterns, on their appetites, on their, in some extreme cases, their hygiene and things like that. But most often, this is all going on up here. And that's why it's so hard to see where people are and their engagement with their work, because it's mental, it's emotional. There's thoughts, even if I just got in the car and drove and just left it, thoughts of quitting, thoughts of I'm just going to take this job and shove it, becomes more prevalent. Okay. And what was at one point, when you're in that honeymoon stage or even that balancing act, what seems like an irrational option, you actually start thinking through. Could I make it if I just quit? Well, I really like to eat, so I've got to stay here, right? And it is not a slippery slope, right? It's not a you descend into the abyss and you've got to stay there. Okay? It just takes self-awareness, and it takes mental effort to get you back to that balancing act stage. But unfortunately, where you are mentally may prohibit you from doing that. So you can see how this can be a wicked cycle. Okay. And the last stage is kind of that, I put the bomb image there because it's kind of an implosion state. That is enmeshment. And that is when burnout becomes the default environment. Okay. And that's where you have been so conditioned and desensitized from burnout that it is permanently affecting your work. And this is where you hear things like quiet quitting. You've probably heard that phrase in the news, and you may have heard it in your workplace as well, that people are just like, you know what, I'm done. And I'm only going to give as much as I absolutely have to, because I'm so fried and I'm so burned out that I can't. And that's when it becomes your standard operating procedure, is at that enmeshment stage. So there are some factors that contribute to a higher rate of burnout. It's not to say that if you are any of these things that it's absolutely going to happen, but you may be more predisposed to have those feelings. A tendency towards perfectionism or a type A personality, you can definitely see that high drive starts you off on that path real strong, and may be subject to those dips, and you feel them more. Being hyper competitive or comparing yourself to other people is a process in which you are going to have a hard time staying on top of all the time. Difficulty asking for support or help. Some people have a difficult time doing that. Some environments make it difficult to do that, right? So there's a shared responsibility on that one. the inability to prioritize work tasks and adjust the effort accordingly. Some people don't do this well. And as a result, those feelings of overload burnout can happen much more easily. And the last one is one that I worry about. We have a very large law enforcement agency here, and that is concerning. And this is very common in law enforcement, in the military, in the fire service, and that is identifying with your job as the most important part of who you are. And as commonly said in North Carolina, you are ate up with it, right? That is who you are. And it permeates every single part of who you are. And I have been talking about this for years, particularly with young deputies that come on board. Because in many of these cases, the risk factor is much higher for occupational injury that ends careers. So if you are a young person and you are ate up with it, and that you are all about being a law enforcement officer or being a fireman, and that's all you know, and you live, eat, and breathe it, and you have an injury that causes you to not be able to do those things, it can be catastrophic to your identity. Okay? And so when you are identifying with your job as the most important part of who you are, you open yourself up to a harder fall, for lack of a better way to put it.
You had one comment. It says, Brian says you allow your job to consume you.
Right. Exactly. It is, if you had to describe who you were, it'd be the first thing you say. Yeah. Good. There are also some lifestyle factors that can contribute to a higher incident rate of burnout. The sudden illness of yourself or somebody close to you can cause it. I mentioned this one earlier, serving as a primary caretaker for a family member. That is oftentimes a physical job, but it is a huge emotional and mental, I don't want to say burden, because I think I don't want to give the impression that it's all burdensome, but it's a huge emotional and mental commitment when you assume those caregiving responsibilities. People who are working 2 or more jobs, and unfortunately, that is more prevalent today than it has been in years past, because of inflation, because of the cost of living. More and more people have side hustles, but it can lead to that overwhelming sense of burnout and lack of control. Okay. The lack of time or involvement in activities outside of work. Okay. And it's a little bit different than that allowing your job to consume who you are and define who you are. It really is about, do you have other ways to mentally stimulate yourself, and ideally something to help you take the pressure off of your everyday stressor. Okay? Balancing work with another major life change, like moving, adding to your family, going back to school. I have a coworker of mine who is a full-time student and a full-time employee, and she is, as I have noted, burning the candle at both ends. But it can lead to burnout in both areas, and so be mindful of how that's going to impact you if you in fact are in that situation. And so it's I think we can't always prevent burnout completely, but we can really think through the impact that it's going to have on who we are. Okay? So I don't want to be overly repetitive, but some of the other causes of burnout, and a big one is overload, and I've said that a number of times, when employees have a never-ending stack of tasks and not enough time to do it in a day. And it coupled with how they generally present as a person. So if you have somebody who is type A, needs to get all their work done before they leave for the day kind of person, and there is a never-ending set of tasks that they need to accomplish, that is going to be in conflict with one another and cause a higher level of stress and exhaustion. Another thing that can cause burnout is pressure to perform, especially if it is a high-profile position, or there are substantial projects or tasks that are associated with it. Here's one that we're going to get to in a little bit: lack of support from managers. Employees deserve constructive feedback and equity and transparency to the extent that you can grant it. And when they don't get the support they need, their stress may become unmanageable. It is not to say managers are the cause of burnout, but they can either contribute to it or take away from it, okay, depending on their actions. Another thing that can cause burnout is a disconnection from personal and organizational values. So a mismatch between an employee's personal values and the organizational values can lead to a higher level of burnout because you're putting more effort into reconciling those two things. And so it is about energy, the expending of effort to do certain things. And if you work for an organization that reflects your personal values and you feel comfortable with decisions being made and that kind of thing, you don't expend effort trying to reconcile those two things, and it reserves effort to do the things where it should be placed. Now, I've seen a lot of people come and go here, and a number of them were not comfortable with the leadership of their department, the leadership of the organization. And if you've reached a point where that is having an impact on your productivity and your mental health, for me, I say go. Because if you can't reconcile those two things, it's like a holy war, right? It's never going to happen as long as you worry about things outside of your control. And so there have been a number of people that I have talked with that have, over a period of time, either disagreed with their department leader, have a lack of trust. And those are things that can't reconcile through one policy, procedure, or program. Okay? And so if that's the case, then sometimes it makes sense to find an organization that matches it. Okay? There are some people that don't do well working in public service. It's a different animal. And I tell folks that in orientation, it's hard. Public service is hard. And some people just aren't cut out for it. And that's okay. Because over time, it's going to do more damage than it will right now. Another thing that can cause burnout is that perception of a broken psychological contract between employers and employees. So this is unfortunately, a psychological contract is the set of unwritten expectations. And oftentimes this is a judgment call about whether an employee feels like the employer's living up to their end of the bargain. Do you feel like your employer is supporting its employees? And what does that look like? It's going to look like something different to every person. So this was a hard one to get a handle on as a manager hoping to influence the rate of burnout, because oftentimes you don't know what's going on. Well, you never know what's going on inside employees' heads, but it's really hard to get at that unless you start talking to people. Okay. And lastly, external stressors, and we've covered some of those already. Life happens, and life is hard, and your employees are going to bring that to work, and there's no way to get around it. Past generations, older generations, Xers, boomers, leave home at home. Work stays at work. Or work's okay to go home, but home's not okay to come to work. And you can't do that. We're all human. And so sometimes you're going to see these pressures from home creep into work and can lead to burnout. And I mentioned the caregiving role. Worrying about how to pay the bills is another biggie. And it's important, if you are in a position of influence, that you don't forget that. Okay? And recognize that just because you don't worry about it doesn't mean other people aren't. Okay. So we've covered a great deal about what burnout is. Now I want to go through, how do we reduce this? Okay, so I'm going to look at some personal ways for you to treat and handle burnout at work. And then we're going to talk about organizationally, how do you do it? First, pay attention to your feelings. If you're having those micro burnout unit times like I am, know what those feel like. Know what those are and how that differs from your everyday productivity. Okay? Examine your boundaries. And this is hard for some people. It's hard for people to say no. And sometimes a too busy workload or that overwhelming workload crush is because every time asked, they say, yeah, I can do that. Okay? So if that's you, recognize what you are able to handle and what you are not. Okay? Cultivate those interests outside of work, not just for stress relief, but for your own mental health. Have a hobby. And for some time, I got out of the habit of reading. I've been a voracious reader most of my life. And I recognized that I was not reading as much as I should, but I didn't want to set, and I read very quickly, so I didn't want to set an unreasonable expectation. I can read a book in a couple of days, no problem. But I've set smaller goals. I'm going to read X amount, and I'm going to read during my lunch hour, things like that. Okay? Build relationships with your colleagues. We spend a lot of time here at work, and to not have that sense of community also leads to burnout. Okay? Try to keep work at work. And some generations are much better at doing this than others. And I recognize it for many of you, and for me too, that's almost impossible at times. But I have a boss currently who's very adamant about that. That try to stay as disconnected as possible when you're on vacation and when you're out of work. Okay. He knows full well it's not always going to happen. But just hearing him say that is helpful. Okay. Work for the quick win. And if you've got, and I am guilty of this, I will make a list of things to do, and I might occasionally include some things that I've already done. Just so I have the satisfaction of crossing them off, right? It's kind of like the concept of when you are attempting to lose weight. You say, I need to lose 50 pounds. And that's what you've got in your head. When you don't lose 50 pounds and you lose 10 pounds, you're going to get frustrated because you got that, I got to lose 50 pounds in my head. Instead, you set a goal of, I got to lose 5 pounds. And then when you lose that 5 pounds, I'm going to lose another 5 pounds. Look for the quick wins. And sometimes that's going to be up to you to ensure. Okay? If you feel comfortable, share your concerns with your manager. Even if you're not able to completely identify what it is, it's just, you're feeling disconnected, you're feeling burned out, you're feeling overloaded. But think through it first. It's a whole lot easier for managers to deal with than this. If I don't get some help here, I'm going to quit. I heard that one the other day from somebody who reports to me. That's starting way up here on that ladder of inference. It's starting way up here on the drama level. So if you can share those feelings and brainstorm possible solutions, that will be helpful. Okay? Take care of your physical health. I don't know about you all, but when I don't eat well, I don't think well. Okay? Now, I wish I could be much better about this in the whole eating well thing. But I find that when I'm stressed and I'm overloaded, I start to do things for expediency, like Hardee's or Burger King, and not for health. Okay? Practice mindfulness, and this is a this is not, I'm not talking about sitting in your office and doing some yoga poses, but you could if that helps you. But just taking that, recognizing that your mental health is critical to your success as a person. And taking time to slow down and slow your brain down. And that looks different for everybody. Sometimes people are into meditation. I have not been able to do meditation. I cannot shut my brain off. But are there things that help you? For me, it's riding with the window down on my way home. And just kind of breathing a little bit. Okay. And lastly, ask for help. And recognize the signs of when you're headed down that path, because when you're drowning, it's more of a cry for help rather than an ask, and that can be difficult. So when you see that happening, ask for help. Okay. Now, I want to introduce this concept. I don't have enough time to go into it in great detail, but if any of you have ever read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, this comes from this. It is habit 3, I believe, and it is about putting, trying to remember what they start with the end in mind, put the first things first, I think is what it is. Anyway, it's about where do you spend your time. And he outlines this time management matrix, and breaks our tasks and our everything into 4 quadrants. Quadrant 1 is that which is important and urgent, crises, those fires we talk about at work, pressing problems, quadrant 1 problems. Quadrant 2 is things that are important but not urgent, things like relationship building, planning, recreational activities. Unfortunately, we don't spend a lot of time in quadrant 2 sometimes because we're dealing with quadrant 1. But better self-management and to be the most effective you really need to spend time on things that are important but not urgent. Okay. And that may be where those de-stressing activities, those hobbies live. Okay. Those things at work where you're just talking to people. Quadrant 3 are things that are not important, but urgent. And oftentimes it's other people's pressing problems. Like when your employees come to you and say, I got this problem. And it's their fire, but now they've co-opted you into it. Okay. So this can be some meetings, emails, interruptions, other people's problems, that kind of thing. I spend a lot of time here. And quadrant 4 is what I call the Facebook quadrant. That's the time wasters, trivial, busy work stuff. And so what will really help to help prevent burnout is to spend time in quadrant 2. So I introduced this idea just to get you thinking, where do you spend your time? All right, let's talk about the workplace a little bit. Engaged employees drive performance. They are the ones that drive results. Keeping burnout out of the workplace, recognizing it when it's happening. It's good for the organization. It's good for the public. We are 40% more productive and 5 times less likely to have a safety incident when we are not burned out. So I have a poll question for you. Of the options that are listed on this poll, who do you feel like, which employee is most likely to burn out from these different descriptions? Looks like we have a tie between the long tenured employee and top performing employee. It is actually the top performing employee. And it can happen because highly engaged people, if they begin to have low well-being due to these unmanageable personal or workplace stressors, in order to be burned out at work, you have to be engaged to begin with. Okay, so the employee has to be all in and care deeply about their work to get to that feeling of being burned out. And so that means top performing, highly engaged employees are at the highest risk for burnout. And what do we do with high performing employees? We give them more stuff to high perform at, right? We tend to pile it on. So be mindful of that if you are a manager. And so let's go through some ways to prevent and reduce burnout in the workplace from a management supervisory kind of perspective. I recognize that you may not all be managers or supervisors, but this really holds true for anybody in the workplace, for yourself or especially if you're responsible for other people. First, prioritize employee well-being and stress management. And it's not a competition between who's stressed out more, you or the employees. There's enough stress to go around. Okay. And if we have higher incidence of burnout, I mean, look at our first question. We had 9 out of 11 answers, I think, or 11 out of 13 answers that said, yes, you had experienced it in the past or you're currently experiencing burnout. That's a lot. And so if that is happening, what is missing? That is our problem-solving brain. And oftentimes when employee well-being and stress management is not prioritized, employees don't feel like they have that outlet. So if you are in a position where you can influence that, prioritize that, and employees will feel that. And they What's that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. The next is to really support managers and employees. And this, I think there's different opinions about how this happens. And unfortunately, I think HR people think they're doing it, but sometimes they're not. And managers play a big role in employee engagement and employee satisfaction with their jobs. And employees who rate their manager as excellent are 5 times more engaged than employees who rate their manager as poor. And so supporting managers and employees is critical in preventing burnout. Because managers have the ability to help maintain workload, to recognize potential, to allow employees to use their greatest strengths, which are different with everybody. There is a baseline feeling of being valued and respected that if it's not present is going to lead to job dissatisfaction much faster and burnout much faster. Okay. Provide recovery time and breaks. And I'm not talking about the 15-minute break that everybody thinks they're entitled to twice a day. Okay. I'm talking about workload breaks and allowing people to enjoy the fruits of their labor, particularly if they're project oriented. Right? So instead of leading into the next big thing when they've concluded, allow them an opportunity to kind of get their house in order mentally, physically, all of that. Okay? And oftentimes our workload doesn't let us do that. So for managers in particular, it's got to be a creative action. Okay? And the last is allow employees to set boundaries. So when your employees come to you and say, I'm fried, here's what I'm feeling, take it seriously. This is your opportunity to really set the tone in the workplace about how you deal with workplace stress and potential burnout. Allow employees and you opportunities to build social connections. Okay? And this is both in the office. I'm not saying you want all of your employees to go out and have a drink together all the time, but recognizing that there are groups that go out to lunch together, we have a birthday celebration once a month for all the people who have birthdays in that month. It's not every month, but we have cake and we try to find a time everybody's available. And you can just come and hang out for a little bit and have some dessert and reconnect with people that you might walk past their office every day, but you don't connect with. Okay? The next is to help employees find their purpose. And this is harder for some than others. And really encourage them to do continuing education and to really get into things that really interest them. Another, and I recognize that some of you work with people who have to be in the office, encourage flexible work arrangements where possible. This is not just working from home. This is marrying up that idea that life happens and that sometimes people are going to need some flexibility. Okay? Consider wellness a holistic thing. It is physical health, it is emotional and mental health, it is financial health, it is social wellness, all of it. Kind of looking at that life 360, right? The whole person. Okay? If you are a manager or supervisor, set clear expectations. Nothing can contribute to job dissatisfaction and ultimately burnout than not knowing what the heck your manager wants you to do. Okay, or not knowing what the expectation of a project or a thing is. Okay? Provide feedback timely, on the spot, and be transparent as you can with decisions and about how decisions are made. And provide resources for burned out employees. If you're not somebody who knows that firsthand, your HR department does. And make sure that you're not shaming people for feeling burned out, and that it is, in fact, something that happens, even to your best employees. And that there are resources available to help you deal with that.
I got a comment.
Okay.
Billy says, seek first to understand them, then to be understood. Covey 7 habits.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite habit. It's habit number 5. We don't listen well as people. And you listen with the intent to understand, not the intent to reply. Very good. Thank you, Billy. So we're right at our hour. So that's all I've got. This is something here's one of my de-stressors and my anti-burnout things, or my pets. So I wanted to put them in this presentation. So does anybody have any questions or thoughts? I'm always open to hearing other ideas as well, but I think this is going to be something that we just have to tune into and recognize that the world these days is nuts, and it's hard to operate on an even keel all the time. But I'd really encourage you to tune into those feelings of potential burnout in yourself and be in tune and recognize when it's happening to other people. Especially those in which you have some influence over. Does anybody have any questions, comments? I'm going to stay on for a little bit after we're done here. If anybody's got anything they want to share that's not fit for public consumption, I'll be here. So thank you all for your attention for the last hour.
Billy says, very good presentation. Thank you, Billy.